In.
Okay. May this evening be a schus for Refu Shalema for Sarah Chana Pua Bas Mariasa. Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining this special program. My name is Rivkie Schochet, and I am a wig stylist here in Toronto. As the saying goes, only a hairdresser knows for sure, because people sitting in a hairdresser's chair talk and share many things with their hairdresser. This happened just over 12 years ago. There was a young lady, she came to me, and while sitting in my chair, she shared that she is getting a wig because she will soon be getting married. Then she asked me to explain to her why married women cover their hair and why they wear wigs. She said that she asked a few of her friends and mentors, but she didn't get any good explanation that really spoke to her, that she really got. And at that moment, I had a flash that went up in my head, and I realized that there is a need for an educational and inspirational program on this special mitzvah. At the time, I called my father-in-law, Rav David Schochet, a senior rabbi of Chabad, and I asked him, if I were to put together such a program, will he attend and give a lecture to explain this mitzvah from various perspectives? When he agreed, I was so excited. And the first of over 15 such Covergirl programs were born. At our very first program, over 150 ladies attended, a mix of all walks of life, from ladies wearing pants to ladies speaking Yiddish and women married to esteemed rabbis. People just wanted to know. After my father-in-law's lecture, there was a lengthy question and answer period. Many women had so many questions, and others just wanted to hear the exchange. I recall clearly there were two ladies that stayed late into the evening. We schmoozed, and these ladies did not seem to be Orthodox or observant, but they sat listening to the question and answer with true interest and fascination. Well, the following year, at the next Covergirl event, in walks in one of these ladies. She greets me and she says, "Do you remember me? Do you recognize me?" It took me a few moments. I couldn't believe it. She was wearing a wig. She told me that a few months earlier, she got married. Her husband and her agreed for her to wear a wig. And since then, they have introduced traditional Jewish customs into their homes. Well, 12 years later, she's going strong. Her children are receiving a Jewish education. Her home is blessed with Jewish values, and she feels it all started right from here. So without further ado, I welcome you to our very special program. And I would like to introduce you to Dr. Jackie Reiss, a very special woman I met 18 years ago, and I'm still inspired by her. She is a doctor of internal medicine, of an incredible person and a beautiful family. Shalom, Jackie, and take it away.
Thank you so much. One moment, we're going to get ready. Thank you so much. I'm honored and I'm humbled to be a part of this amazing forum. In general, I try to shy away from events where I have to speak, but like, who can say no to Rivkie? And you'll see. I want to give you a little background before I begin with my story. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in a relatively small suburb. My parents raised me and my sister Reform, and my knowledge of Judaism was limited to Sunday school lessons. We knew the holidays, we knew the basic things about the holidays. We knew Rosh Hashanah and eating apples. We knew fasting on Yom Kippur, Pesach, matzahs, etc. But we didn't know really Judaism. Then I married my husband, who also grew up Reform and was very similar in his knowledge base. And when we were pregnant with our first child, we realized really how little we knew. So we thought, we have to do something. We want to raise our children Jewish. What should we do? So we were on a mission to become more Jewish. We're indebted to Aisha Torah and to our rabbi, Aaron Winters Etzal, and his wife, Hani, for their help on this journey. With compassion and understanding and sincerity, these individuals were and are still responsible for helping our family grow and to continue to reach higher levels. After a period of several years with Aisha Torah and our rabbi's guidance, we succeeded in taking the steps of keeping Shabbos, Kashrus, and Taharas HaMishpacha, and enrolling our children in the local Jewish day schools. However, despite this process, I just couldn't think of covering my hair. It just wasn't going to happen. Then 18 years ago, we, in our community of Chesterfield, which is a suburb of St. Louis, several of the women covered their hair, but most didn't. The women who covered their hair included our Rebbitzin, Hani Winter, as well as the Kollel wives and a few other people. At that point, St. Louis really didn't have a sheitel because this was 18 years ago. Instead, every once in a while, we brought in somebody from out of town, and she'd bring a variety of sheitels, and people would make appointments, and they'd meet with her. But that was very daunting. That was like way unnerving for me. And so for me to do something like that freaked me out entirely. As a doctor, I work in an environment where I'm constantly around people. They can be patients, our staff, coworkers. And so walking in with a wig on my head was terrifying. So in addition, I also was worried about my non-observant relatives, what they thought about hair covering. Over the course of several months, I kept thinking about this and it was just in the back of my brain. Should I cover my hair? Should I not cover my hair? And it was eating away at me. And I was thinking, maybe. About a year before I made the leap of buying my first sheitel, a good friend of mine, Janice Mankiewicz, began covering her hair. Retrospectively, that might have been the impetus that initiated my consideration of doing such a thing. At the same time, I had been trying to become pregnant, and I had 2 devastating early first trimester miscarriages, and then I had a third. At this point, I was a hormonal mess. I was desperate for another child, but I kept telling my husband, just devastated, maybe Hashem's just saying no. Maybe that's the answer. It's no. Around Rosh Hashanah of 2002, I decided that I maybe should take on something. The more I pondered what this Kabbalah should be, the more my brain kept going back to cover your hair, cover your hair. Even knowing that this was the right thing to do, I couldn't comprehend doing such a drastic change. I absolutely did not feel comfortable covering my hair using a hat or scarf. Instead, I figured that seeing patients, I needed something less conspicuous, something more natural, that they wouldn't be staring at me, or I would feel like they would be staring at me. So I told my husband, if I ever bought a sheitel, I wanted it to be like Cindy Scheinbein's. She was a former St. Louisan who moved to Toronto, and she had this beautiful short sheitel that no one could ever tell was a wig. So when I decided that I wanted to cover my hair, I called Cindy and I said, where did you get this wonderful sheitel? And she referred me to Rivkie. Taking that first step of calling Rivkie was terrifying because that meant that I actually was probably kind of going to do this. I was committing. I explained to Rivkie that I was interested in buying a sheitel and that I wanted to cover my hair. So she was checking her appointment book and her schedule and trying to figure out when I could come to Toronto. And I explained to Rivkie, poor Rivkie, could you please fly to St. Louis? And Rivkie told me how busy she was and that really wasn't a realistic option for her. So now I'm conflicted. I'm thinking maybe I should, but maybe in the back of my head I shouldn't. I didn't feel I could fly to Toronto, missing work and leaving my 3 kids. And I was just so anxious about this whole thing. So I think we left it at that point that I should think about it and I'd get back to her about whether and when I could come to Toronto. In the meantime, my husband was so excited with this idea of me covering my hair. And if anybody knows my husband, he gets obsessed with something and he can't let go. He goes to all lengths to try to make it happen. So if I remember correctly, he tried calling Rivkie, thinking he could persuade her to come to St. Louis, but he was unsuccessful as well. So several days later, I think I spoke with Rivkie again. And at some point in the conversation, and my kids can tell you I tend to ramble, and you might see that right now that I'm rambling, but I'm talking and talking, and I blurt out without realizing what I'm saying that I had suffered several miscarriages and that I really wanted to take this on. I wanted to cover my hair. And at the time, I didn't realize that this was a game changer for Rivkie. She ended the call, and later that night, she called me back and she said, I'm coming to St. Louis. And I was like, wow, great. We worked out the details, and she flew in Holomoid Sukkos. I was a bit insecure about this because I didn't want anybody to know about Rivkie coming to St. Louis to sell me a sheitel event. I was still very, very nervous, but I did tell our rabbi and our rebbitzin. Rivkie was in the middle of cutting one of the sheitels when all of a sudden a knock at the door, and a friend of mine who drives carpool appeared. I panicked. Rivkie goes running into another room, and I answer the door, trying to act cool and casual. And my carpool friend is just chatting away, and I'm like giving one-word answers, like trying to give her the hint, please leave. But she starts looking around my kitchen, and she's noticing things like maybe a sheitel head and some brushes and other things that shouldn't be there. And she all of a sudden realizes what's going on. And Rivkie comes out, and then she tells Rivkie her own story, that she just got a recent haircut, and it's a mess, and she wants to cover her hair now. And eventually she actually did cover her hair. But as soon as we get her out the door, Rivkie starts cutting the sheitel again, and I hear another car pull up. And here this is a day that I've taken off work. Nobody should be coming to my house, and another thing's happening. So all of a sudden I hear all these kids running out, and unbeknownst to me, my husband had okayed a sukkah hopping trip for the day school to our house on that day. And I raced to see who could possibly be at our house. And I look out, and all these kids from my son's school come racing toward our sukkah. And luckily, our Rebbitzin was their Mora. She knows what's going on. She helps me get some nash for the kids, get them in and out of our sukkah quickly and on their way to the next sukkah. With a sigh of relief, we go back, and Rivkie and I resume our sheitel session. The entire time, Rivkie spoke to me about this great mitzvah, keeping me comfortable, happy with my decision, and in fact, I was on a high. Even though I was excited to begin observing this mitzvah, though, I still had to face wearing the sheitel in public. It was nice when I could wear it around my house, and I was very comfortable, but when it came time for me to go to work or to confront my parents, those were two very anxious moments. So I called my parents, and I knew that they had this mental idea that I was going to look like one of these characters in a cartoon or a witch costume with some crazy wig. But much to my relief, my parents saw the wig, loved it, and realized I had not, in fact, lost my mind, or most of my mind. The next challenge was work. My office has many women, and women can really criticize each other, so I was very nervous. So I had nurses and secretaries. I walked in, and everybody stopped talking and looked at me. And then one said, I like your hair. What's different? And another started guessing extensions, and another one said highlighting. And then finally, our older transcription woman said, I think it's a wig. And I said, yep. And I quickly explained to them briefly my reasons for covering my hair for religious reasons. Although the other physician in my office is a male and he is a secular Jew, I decided I better tell him against all my nurses' wishes. They thought it was hilarious that he'd never even noticed this, but I decided he should be in on this as well. He didn't look at me funny, but every once in a while he'll make a joke about haircuts, but that's about it. So outside of my family and my work, I was still self-conscious, even walking into shul the first time. But then I realized everybody has their own issue, and they're not going to focus on me. It's time to move on. I went about my routine, proud to wear my sheitel, and several months went away, and I called Rivkie with the good news. I was 5 months pregnant, further in my pregnancy than I had been with any of the miscarriages. She asked me for my Hebrew name because at that very moment, she was about to visit the Rebbe's kever. In August of 2003, I gave birth to a baby girl whom we named Rachelea. I knew I had to call Rivkie and inform her of this tremendous bracha. Looking back, the struggle I had in covering my hair really became a non-issue. Once I managed to conquer this challenge, it led Hashem's blessing me with a full-term pregnancy and a beautiful daughter, Kainahara.
You're muted. We don't hear you, Rivkie. You're mute. You have to unmute yourself. Or Goldie has to unmute you.
Okay.
Okay, now we hear you.
You hear me?
Now we do.
Jackie, wow, that was so inspiring. What an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing. All the best to you and your beautiful family. Aloha Pearl. I would like to introduce you to our next fabulous speaker, Mrs. Pearl Krasnjansky. She, with her husband, co-founder of Chabad in Hawaii, established 33 years ago. She's a mother of 7 children. She's a sought-after speaker. She's an author and educational director. Her limitless energy earned her the nickname Hurricane Pearl. and the local press. With her husband, they established a permanent Jewish presence on 3 other Hawaiian islands, assisting the spiritual and physical needs of thousands of Jewish tourists. It is no longer novelty to spot someone wearing a colorful Hawaiian kippah. Pearl, take it away.
Thank you, Rivkie. Thank you. And Jackie, that was really, really beautiful and very moving. I'm always in awe when I hear people's stories of how they come to observance on their own, which is takes a lot of inner strength. So Yasher Koch to you. We're going to start by saying a parak of Tehillim, a chapter of Tehillim. If Rivkie, if you want to repeat Refuah Shlema for the women that you mentioned.
Refuah Shlema Sarah Chana Pua Bas Mariasa.
Refuah Shlema.
Yisrael.
Anybody that needs a blessing for healing, our Torah study tonight should assist their spiritual and physical healing. Okay, if anybody wants to join me, we'll say Parak Kuf Aleph, chapter 121. Shir lamalot esa inai el haharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim ba'aretz. Al yitain lamot raglecha al yanum shamrecha. Hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha al yad yeminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yarech balayla. Adonai yishmarcha mikora, yishmar et nafshecha, Adonai yishmar tzeicha uvoecha neyata v'yad olam. May God watch our footsteps now and forevermore, our coming and our going. So thank you for having me, ladies, and thank you, Rivkie. And since I can't show you the Hawaiian flowers, I decided to wear them. So I don't know if you can see, this is my Hawaiian flowered outfit. From what I heard, and I saw some of the videos, you put on some pretty fabulous events the previous years. I'm sorry to be missing those delicious, elegant pastries. We definitely don't get those in Hawaii. And beautiful, elegant homes. But I guess we'll have to settle for sitting in front of a computer and seeing and meeting each other that way. So I'd like to start with a story. In 1955, there was a man called Herbert Weiner, who was a Reform rabbi. He was also an author. He wrote the book 9.5 Mystics. And as evidence that he has a sense of humor, he considered himself the half a mystic. And he was a Reform rabbi, as I had said, and he had heard about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe was then Rebbe for about 5 or 6 years. In 1955, that would be 4 or 5 years. And he decided he wanted to see the Rebbe. And he went to a Fabrengen, a gathering where hundreds and sometimes thousands of people would go listen to the Rebbe speak Torah for hours. And after that, he made an appointment to see the Rebbe in a private session, which he did. And he walked away impressed and with a lot of food for thought. And he decided he wants to go visit the Rebbe again. So it took a year, and the following year, in 1956, he went to see the Rebbe again. And they had a long conversation on many subjects. And finally, towards the end, when it was really time for him to leave, Rabbi Weiner tells the Rebbe, "Excuse my chutzpah, Rabbi, but I'd like to ask you a question, and please don't be offended." And he says like this. He says, "I notice in the eyes of your followers a certain naivete, even simplicity, if you will. Why is that? The way they look at the world." And it wasn't said as a compliment. So first the Rebbe reassured him that he was not offended. And then the Rebbe told him that what you see is not naivete. What it is the lack of a kera. That's the word the Rebbe used. Kera meaning a split. He said, "Rabbi Weiner, I hope you're not offended, but in your life and in the lives of many of your followers, you are used to dealing with Jews that have almost a split personality. They have the Jewish aspect of their lives and the rest of their lives. And the two of them are very often in conflict or not necessarily in such harmony with each other." The Rebbe said, what you see in my followers is the lack of a kera, the lack of a split, because they are, before this term became popular, organically whole. Their lives are one seamless whole. They're Jewish whenever, wherever they go. And it creates an inner peacefulness, and that's what you're seeing in their eyes. And the reason I bring up the story is because I think that all of us can be or become those Hasidim in 1956, where we don't have that kera, that inner conflict between different aspects of our lives and where all of our lives are seamlessly blended into one whole. So before we talk about hair covering, I actually want to kind of take a step back and look at the broader picture of masculine and feminine, and specifically as it's discussed in Kabbalistic sources. Because if we only talk about hair covering, I feel it's like those pictures. Maybe you saw those children's pictures. Somebody can mute themselves. Those children's pictures, it's like where they put something like really, really close, and well, this is a venture. And you kind of have to guess what it is, and it's almost impossible to see or know what the picture is. Like I'll show you the nose of an elephant or the tusk of an elephant, excuse me, and you have no idea what it is because all you see is this pure white blob and mass. But then when they move the picture further away, you can tell that it's an elephant. So in the very same way, I feel that if we only discuss a small portion of the picture, there's a much greater appreciation in the context of the broader whole. And this also reminds me of when I was a little girl, and here I'm going to date myself a little bit. They had those machines in the candy store where we used to pay like either a penny or a nickel. When it went up, it became a dime. Now it's probably a quarter. And you'll get a little toy when you turn the metal knob. And one of the toys that would come out that I really liked was a kaleidoscope. And I love the fact that every time you turn the knob a little bit, you saw a whole different picture. And I believe that's what life is about. That when we learn and we grow, we shift perspective like the kaleidoscope. So I'm hoping tonight we can turn the knob on the kaleidoscope a little bit deeper and gain a deeper understanding of hair covering. So, being as nothing is coincidence, we find ourselves now 5 days before Rosh Hashanah and 15 days before Yom Kippur, and in the Hebrew month of Elul, which is, as we all know, the season of Tshuva. Now, Tshuva is always normally translated as repentance, but we know that really that's not so. Repentance has a whole different connotation than the real Jewish understanding of it is Tshuva, to return, from the root of the word shuv, to return to our essence. So why? Why is this time that we're in the time for Tshuva? I'm going to go back a little bit in history. Many of you are familiar with the story, so bear with me. And it starts at Mount Sinai, at Har Sinai, when the Jewish people got the Torah, got the Ten Commandments, and then Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, went up to heaven for 40 days and 40 nights to study the Torah that God gave him. Now, when he was there, he told the Jewish people that he's going to be gone for a full 40 days and 40 nights. And through their miscalculation on what they thought was the 40th day, but was in actuality the 39th, Moshe didn't come down. They panicked. He didn't appear. They're stuck in the desert. And I see a question, so we'll deal with the questions at the end if you don't mind. So Moshe Rabbeinu did not come down. So there was a group of people known as the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were the mixed multitude. They were a group of Egyptians who decided to convert to Judaism. Unfortunately, their conversion was not wholehearted. They were kind of cashing in on a good opportunity. They saw that, you know, the Jews' luck was on the up and up with all the 10 plagues that were going on. So this was a great time they decided to become Jewish. But it wasn't really out of pure motives, and therefore their conversion was not really pure. And throughout the 40 years of the desert, they kept creating problems. So once Moshe Rabbeinu did not appear, they panicked and they said, okay, we're a nation of a couple million people. We're stuck in the desert, no leader. What are we going to do? So the Erev Rav returned to their roots. And remember, they were pagan people. They were idol-worshiping people. This is where they came from. So they explained and they swayed the Jewish people with the following argument. They said, you know what? When the 10 plagues were going on in Egypt and all the miracles that you saw took place, that was the Jewish gods were fighting all the other gods, and they were winning. So if that's the case, then it's time to worship the Jewish God in physical form again. And they chose an ox, they chose a calf, because Joseph was the ruler of Egypt. And as we know, the 12 tribes, they each have an animal that represents them. So he was an ox. So this is why, the non-Jewish nation worship natural powers, because they feel that God is too lofty. He's too great to occupy himself with the minutiae and the little details of everything that's going on in this world. And that's why they ascribed natural forces godly powers. And that's why they decided to worship the sun being the most, which is why till today, The Gregorian or secular calendar is a solar calendar. It's based on the sun. If you look deeply into the roots of it, this is the idea of the natural forces having power over this universe. However, the Jewish people, we have a lunar calendar, and we are compared to the moon. We're connected and existentially compared to the moon. And why are we compared to the moon? So let's talk about the moon for a minute. On the fourth day of creation, it says that God created two luminaries, two great lights, one to rule by day, the sun, and one to rule by night. The moon was not happy, as they say. And the moon came complaining to God and said, you can't have two kings wearing one crown. And Hashem said, you know what? You're right. And so God took away the light of the moon. And ever since then, the moon's light has been merely a reflection of the sun's light. Now, the moon, not coincidentally, the word for moon in Hebrew is levana, which is the feminine. And the Hebrew language, it's a feminine conjugation. The Hebrew language being Lashon HaKodesh, it's not only Ivrit for those of you that speak Hebrew, but it's Lashon HaKodesh, it's the holy tongue. It's the language which God created all of existence and continues to recreate it at every moment. Therefore, it is not coincidental that the moon is in the feminine. So I forgot to posit the question at the beginning. Who was the one group that did not participate in the Son of the Golden Calf? That were the women. The men came to the women and said, give us your golden jewelry and we're going to throw it in the fire and it's going to be part of the calf. And the woman said, heck no, you want jewelry, take your own stuff. And that's what the men actually did. It says the men took off their nose rings, the men had earrings, and they took off whatever jewelry they had. But the women did not give their jewelry. And so forever after, it says that God rewarded us, and we have Rosh Chodesh. We have the new moon, the beginning of the month, as our reward. And so the question that we're trying to answer is, why? What does Rosh Chodesh have to do with not giving our jewelry? And the answer lies in the moon. The moon waxes and wanes, grows bigger and smaller, and disappears, and then once again experiences rebirth. So the moon, she clearly parallels the cycles in a woman's lifetime, both emotionally, psychologically, physiologically. So this is all a Kabbalistic explanation. And if we look at Kabbalah, there's a lot more going on about the feminine. But before I talk about that, a very interesting cultural footnote. In 1992, there was a psychologist called John Gray, and he wrote a book. Those of you that are old enough to remember, the younger ones on the chat don't, on the Zoom do not. But he wrote a book called Women Are from Venus and Men Are from Mars. This book was an enormous success, huge. I mean, it spawned an entire subculture for those of you that were around and adults and alive in the 1990s and remember. It sold 15 million copies. It clearly struck a very deep chord in our culture. And I quote, it was the highest ranked work of the 1990s, the entire decade. It was, mind you, it spent 121 weeks on the bestseller list. And for those of you that are good at math, that's over 2 years. Okay, 52 weeks a year, that's 104, 120, that's almost 2.5 years. And I want to quote to you because it's so mind-bending. The book, and it's, excuse me one second, please. The book and its central metaphor became the foundation for, and listen to this, I'm quoting to you over here. The author's subsequent books, recordings, seminars, theme vacations, you can't make this stuff up, one-man Broadway show, a TV sitcom, workout videos, a podcast, wait, I'm not done yet, a men's and women's clothing lines, fragrances, travel guides, and this is the best one yet, his and hers salad dressings. Okay, so John Gray, writing about the differences between men and women, clearly, you know, touched a nerve in our society. So he had it somewhat right. When he said that women are from Venus and men are from Mars, he had the general idea right, that women and men are different, and they actually are at their very root, at their very source, coming from two different places. but his specifics are a little off. And now we're going to talk about where men and women are from Kabbalistically. So Goldie, do you mind, can you show the Sphira page? Sphirot? Okay. So everyone, a short lesson in Kabbalah 101. Okay. Very, very briefly, when God created the world, he manifested himself and continues to do so through 10 attributes, 10 characteristics, so to speak, and these are mirrored in our psycho-emotional makeup. So we have psychologically, physically, spiritual 10 attributes that mirror God's attributes. Now I'm going to read to you the Wikipedia definition of the Sphirot. Sphirot, meaning emanations, are the 10 attributes / emanations in Kabbalah to which the Ein Sof, God, reveals himself and continually creates the physical world. So if you look at the bottom one says Malchut or Malchus, excuse my Ashkenazi accent. So Malchus is royalty. And what does Malchus do? Malchus connects to this world in a way that the other spheres don't. Malchus takes from the, it's okay, Goldie, you can let go of the picture because I have it and I can show the ladies. Okay. Malchus, which is the bottom, so it looks like it's the lowest of all God's attributes. But what it actually does, it takes these 6 emotive attributes before it, which I'm going to go through really quickly. There's chesed, which is loving kindness. There's gvura, which is strength, strictness, severity. There's tiferet, which is compassion and beauty, which is a harmony of kindness and severity. We have hod, splendor, netzach, eternity, yesod, foundation, and malchut, which is, as we said, royalty, rulership. She is considered the feminine attribute, and she takes those 6 masculine attributes before her and channels it all into what we know as lower worlds. There are many spiritual worlds above our own, and finally channels it into our own world. Much in the same way, analogous to the way Shabbat or Shabbos takes the 6 days of the week where we're doing, active. We're in masculine mode all week, and we take it into Shabbos. Shabbat embraces those 6 days of the week and channels out spiritual power, which nourishes all the days of the rest of the week. So Malchut and Shabbat, they're both in the feminine mode, receive from the masculine that precedes it, channels it, nourishes it, and then gives it forward. So men represent, if you look again at the diagram, men represent outwardness. You see the central attribute, and from that it flows outward. Women represent receiving, inwardness. And we see this even physiologically, the way men and women are created. Men are created in a way that their outward projection is a primary, prominent, I should say, part of their bodies, and women receive inwardly. You know, I want to share a story, not actually a story, just an incident that happened that really struck me and has stayed with me for a number of years. My second daughter, Rivkie, used to live on the big island of we're going to get to Shaitel soon. I see a comment there. My daughter Rivkie lived on the big island of Hawaii. The island and the state is the same name. And she was there on Shlucha, an emissary of the Rebbe, with her husband and children for 7 years. And I remember once I visited her from Honolulu. I flew over for the day, and we were sitting, and I saw that on the wall of her home, she had a picture of her wedding. And it was only one picture. And it was really interesting to me because in that one picture, she was veiled, and you only saw her husband's face. And I thought she was such a beautiful bride. What a waste. And I said, Rivkie, why didn't you put up a picture where we could see your face? Why do you have a picture of you veiled and covered? And she said something that I thought was really perceptive and observant for a young girl. And she tells me like this: my son-in-law is a very gregarious kind of person. He's an entrepreneur, he's a social person, he's a doer, he loves people. In other words, he's a very externally projecting kind of person. She, when she was in high school, she was similar, but a little bit more toned down, but always out there with friends, sociable, etc. And she said, Ma, I realized that in a marriage, we both can't be that way. So I need to step back a little bit. And that's why I love the picture of my face being covered, because who I am is not out there for the world. Interestingly enough, I have a sister-in-law who's in a somewhat similar situation. Her husband is very prominent, and not going to mention names right now, but he's a very prominent personality in the Jewish world. And she is a powerhouse of a person. She's beautiful, she's intelligent, she's capable, she's talented, but she does not appear on the public stage. I don't mean that literally, I mean that metaphorically. Her husband is the one that appears on stage, and all her energy and all her power is backstage. It's with the family, it's with the friends, and I thought that was an interesting expression of the male-female dichotomy. So if we go back to the Kabbalistic chart again, Malchus or Malchut, royalty, which is the feminine, can relate to the lower world, because there's a principle in Torah that says that everything that is higher can go lower, falls lower. I don't know much of physics, but there's a general rule in Torah that whatever is true in the spiritual realms, it mirrors itself in the physical. And whatever is true here in the physical world is true spiritually as well. I mean, Isaiah, Yeshayahu, the prophet, said it much better than I did. He said, from my flesh, I perceive God. From my own body, from my own life, from my own emotions, from my own experiences, I can extrapolate to whatever level what that means in a spiritual way. So Malchus, seemingly the lowest, actually comes from a higher source. And let me just illustrate with a little analogy, which is very often given in Hasidut. If you have a stone that's falling from a wall, the closer it is to the ground, the closer it will fall to the wall. So if, let's say, the stone is here, it will fall here. If the stone is a little higher up on the wall, it will fall a little further. The higher up it is, the further it goes. The taller it is, the further it goes. Okay? In the same way that even though it seems like the woman, the feminine, is the lowest attributes because she's beneath and receives all the masculine, but she takes all that and only she has the ability to channel it lower. So the male is considered the mashpia, or the influencer and the giver, and the woman is the makabel, the receiver. So because women are connected, they're connected to Malchus, and they understand that as lofty as God is, nonetheless, he can come way, way down into our world and deal with all the minutiae and all the stupidity and all the physicality of this world. He's not that removed from this world. A woman intuitively understands that because she comes from Malchus. And therefore, that is why the women got the new moon, got the Rosh Chodesh as a little vacation, as a gift. Because we are attuned to the moon, we are cyclical, we can understand the very high and the very low at the same time. Now, I want to talk a little bit now about the masculine and feminine in Judaism, the masculine and feminine paradigm, because this is really the basis of all civilization. It's not only that, as we know, that masculine, feminine, husband and wife represent the God-Jewish people relationship, but it also represents the relationship of creator to creation. Because remember, God is the giver, and we as creation are always receiving. We're recipients of God's kindness every moment. And therefore, the relationship of masculine and feminine is absolutely crucial and pivotal to the fulfillment of the world. And by the way, well, not so by the way, but we see that today, as the world is moving closer and closer, and we're on the precipice, we're just on the cusp of the world's fulfilling its purpose. In other words, we're near the end of times, we're near the redemption. As that happens, the masculine feminine paradigm gets tons of pushback. There is a blurring of all kinds of assaults on gender. There's all kinds of assaults on marriage, the institution of marriage, which is the basic male-female model in this world. And the reason for that is King Solomon, the wisest of all men, put it a lot better than I could. So I'm going to quote him. He said, Zeh lumat zeh asa Elokim, that God created this opposite this. There's holiness, there's unholiness. There's good and there's bad. There's light and there's dark. So wherever, now that the world is reaching more its fulfillment, there's pushback. Forces of unholiness are not happy about this. So that's why we see a lot of this going on in our world today. In any case, everything in this world has a male-female aspect. So when God diminished the light of the moon, everything feminine, every feminine aspect of this world became diminished, became smaller, had a fall, so to speak. And let's go back to the beginnings of time, so we'll see how everything has a male and female aspect. When God created the first human being, it was Adam and Chava. Now, just by the way, I like to translate everything from Hebrew to English. This is one exception. I always say Chava, and I don't like to say Eve. And that's because when I was studying this, I found out years ago that Eve was translated as Chava from the Hebrew to the English because it's taken from the Old English root of the word evil, because the early Christians, the writers of the earliest translation of the Old Testament, the Bible, our Torah, saw a woman as the seductress, evil temptress. And so that's not something that I'm comfortable using, and therefore I only use Chava. So Adam and Chava were created as one androgynous being. They were created back to back. And in the Torah it says about their creation, and I quote, Vayivra Elokim et Adam b'tzalmo, I'll translate in a second, b'tzelem Elokim bara oto, zachar u'nekeva bara otam. That God created man in his image, created Adam, not man, he created Adam in his image. He created him in the image of God. Male and female, he created them. So Adam and Chava were initially one being. And then God separated out a part of Adam, and Chava, the female, became her own entity in this world. Okay? So that when God created male and female, and since we are created in the image of God, and everything in this world is in the image of God, that means there's a male and a female aspect to everything. Even us men and women. Men have some female in them, and women have some male in them, like my husband sometimes tells me. So now we see that the world that we live in general is a binary world. On, off, light, dark, heaven and earth, up, down, even computers, which are, the complex engine of our world today. I was in a previous incarnation before I became quote unquote Rebbitzin. I prefer the title Shlucha, which is an emissary of the Rebbe. But before I became a Rebbitzin, I was a software engineer, AKA a computer programmer. And I will tell you that even the most complex piece of hardware and the most complicated software programs are all a series of bits and bytes, zeros and ones. So that's the kind of world we live in, because that reflects the masculine and feminine aspects of God, the masculine and feminine aspects of ourselves. Now, like we said before, when the moon was diminished, everything feminine became diminished. So let that sink in for a second. Every aspect of existence that is feminine, that is female, had a downfall, so to speak. And it is only when the world is fully repaired that the feminine will regain her full light and shine again. And as we are getting closer to those times, we know it says in Hasidic mystical sources, and the Rebbe would quote this a lot, Eshet Chayil Ateret Bala, the woman of valor that we're going to quote in a second. She is the crown to her husband. So just as a crown sits on the head, the woman, the female, the feminine will be ascendant in the times of the redemption, in the times of Mashiach. And this is where we're at now. As you can see, if you take a step back and you look at the history of the world and you look at how the world is evolving, you see that we are operating in a much more feminine mode than we ever did before. If you look in the corporate world, the idea of leadership is now moving towards a much more feminine mode. In other words, collegiality versus top down, right? Instead of the male giving the orders. It's more groupthink. Let's see how everybody can be involved. Other female attributes that are now being more valued is the concrete versus the abstract, taking the abstract and making it real, making it concrete. Empathy, sensitivity, even like 50 years ago, this wasn't even talked about in the workplace. I'll give you another fascinating example of how the world is moving and changing direction. Over 40 years ago, there was a natural disaster, excuse me, but I don't remember the details of which it was. And as is commonplace now, but was not then, all the nations of the world sprang into action to see who could help that nation. It was, I don't remember, some far off country in Southeast Asia, and countries all over the world. This one was sending money, and this one was sending personnel, and this one was sending doctors, and this one was sending medical supplies. And there Rivkie commented about that. That if you look back historically, nations, everybody took care of themselves. It was a dog-eat-dog world. Nobody worried about anybody else. That means that the world is moving towards Jewish values, gmilut chasadim, and towards more feminine values. Because this is the beginning of the fulfillment of when we will see the feminine ascendancy. Now, when also an interesting footnote, when Chava was separated out from Adam, ever since then, the desire and the attraction of one gender for the other is a reflection of that desire to get back to that oneness that we had before the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. We want to go back to our original, primordial, perfect state of being where we were truly one. And this desire is actually mentioned as part of Chava's punishment. God tells her, Elishech chukatech, your desire shall be to your husband. Okay, so let's go back again to the moon, Malchus, and what is the feminine. It says again that the feminine, Malchut, has nothing of her own. So that's a little bit jarring, and we don't understand that. How is Chava, the first woman, who's called Chava because she was Ein Kol Chai, the mother of all living, how could she have nothing on her own? I mean, something doesn't compute. And what this means is that Chava and every woman thereafter, what she does is she takes that which she receives, she receives that which she is given, and then she nourishes it, she nurtures it, she takes the potential and she turns it into something concrete and gives it back to the world. Like we said, Shabbat takes from the days before her and gives it to the week after her. If you look at, very quickly at Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor, what Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, the wisest of all men, he composed a poem that we sing every night at the Shabbos table, the Shabbat table, and that is the archetypal woman, the typical woman in his world was definitely a superwoman because she does everything from A to Z. So just a few examples. He says she takes wool and flax and she creates from it the wool of her hands. She considers a field, buys it, and then turns it into a kerem, a vineyard. She makes herself curtains and she makes herself linen. So you have one example after the other where the woman takes the raw stuff of the universe and makes that into pretty much something that is usable, which is, by the way, why, fascinatingly enough, if you can Google this afterwards, if you look at the representation of the spirit in the human body, because each sphera has a human counterpart, Malchus, the female attribute, is the womb. The womb which nourishes, takes in, and gives back. Because obviously the most existential example of that is that when a woman receives a man's seed, takes that and creates a complete human life that grows within her womb. In the same way, just by the way, the earth is also called in Kabbalistic writings is female, because the earth receives seed. What happens to the seed? It totally disintegrates within the earth, but then what does it give back? Grass, flowers, plants, and trees, and even fruit-bearing trees that have more seeds that will go on to reproduce more, which is much greater than the quantity and quality of that one seed that Mother Earth received. In English, we say Mother Nature, but in Torah lingo, it's Mother Earth. So now we see that the feminine has a tremendous amount of power. It has the power to be as close to God as humanly possible, which is the power to create life. Obviously, it takes masculine and feminine. You need the seed. But the woman is the one that nourishes that seed in her womb to become a human being. So that power, something that's that powerful, that when Malchus descends in this world, she has to safeguard herself, and she has to take precautions, and she has to make sure that negative spiritual forces that are at work in the world don't latch on to her and drag her down to their level. Because the feminine tendency is to get so involved in creation and in the challenge of introducing God's presence, because that's what we are. That's what Jewish people are, and that's what Jewish women are. We are here to make the world God's home. And we can get so involved that we can forget about protecting that vulnerable part of ourselves. And we can, God forbid, we can cross that delicate line between nourishing the world and being influenced or the unholy forces taking nourishment from us. And because this is our nature to nourish and to give and to seek perfection, that's why, not surprisingly, you'll find Jews, and specifically Jewish women, at the forefront of almost every social justice movement, because that is the secular equivalent of what we call tikkun olam, repairing the world. So every social justice movement is out there to make the world a better place, to make the world a more perfect place. Communism wanted to equalize everybody's economic situation. Feminism wanted to give women the rights due to them in the workplace, etc., etc. If you look at the suffragette movement, over 100 years ago, women were struggling and fighting and fought for almost 100 years to get the vote. In August of 1920, 100 years ago, women got the vote. And who was at the forefront of that effort? You guessed it, Jewish women. Because they're taking and channeling all that energy that we are meant to channel in repairing the world, and taking that power, which, if I can give you another illustration, it's like nuclear power. Nuclear power is so powerful. So it has a positive effect and it has a negative effect. The positive effect would be where we get cheap and plentiful power. And the negative effect is the atomic bomb, which we saw the devastation that it caused in World War II, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, in our own day and age, Chernobyl and the Ukraine. It caused awful devastation. The feminine power is that power. So now that we understand the power of the feminine as viewed through the Kabbalistic dimension, let's talk about here, okay? I saw a question on the chat in the beginning, enough about Kabbalah, what about here? So we'll talk a little bit about here, and I'll make it fast because I see it's getting a little bit late. So everybody looks at here through their own lens, their own paradigm, right? A scientist looks at here at how it affects the function of the human body. A swimmer looks at here at how it affects his or her speed. Did anybody ever talk to somebody who swims races for competitive reasons? A competitive swimmer, even a few years, they'll worry about how it will affect their ultimate goal. Torah, and specifically the Kabbalah, looks at here, of course, and what does Torah and Kabbalah do? It looks beneath the surface. We're trying to get at the truth beneath the physical material reality that we see. So we're trying to find the godly and the spiritual dimension beneath everything. So Kabbalah wants to understand, what is the spiritual aspect of here? How does it help us, or on the contrary, keep us from navigating our way through our life's spiritual journey? Does it help us? Does it harm us? And how? And as we said before, that we are created in the mirror image of God. Another explanation of that is that the Jewish people, by our very existence, we have the unique and extraordinary ability, I would say, make that privilege an opportunity to mirror and testify to God's existence in the world, not only by our being, but even with every limb of our body. Those of you that say the Nishmat prayer on Shabbat, Kol Atzmotai Tomarna, it says that every limb will praise God. In other words, with every part of our body. And yes, even with our here, we can serve God and bring holiness into the world, or God forbid, the opposite, right? So here plays very different roles in different situations. Men have here, women have here. Those of you that have done some Torah study know about the Nazir, the Nazirite, who took a vow not to drink wine. He has to let his hair grow long. He's not allowed to cut his hair. In contrast, the Torah tells us about another situation where somebody had to have their hair totally removed. Does anybody know what that might be? Anybody want to take a guess? Okay, I can't see everybody, so I'll just give you the answer, the easy way out, the cheat sheet. So in the times of the temple of the Mishkan, when the Levium, the Levites, had to serve God, they became, so to speak, God's representatives in the temple. What did their inauguration rite require? It required that they shave every hair of their body. Okay, thank you, Hang Elaine, thank you. So in other words, there are times that hair is a positive force and feeds positive energy, and there is a time that hair feeds negative energy. Kabbalistically, men are supposed to remove as much as possible the hair on their heads, and by contrast, they're supposed to leave their payot and their beard. The hair on their heads, believe it or not, this sounds counterintuitive, but men represent chesed, which are kindness, and women represent gvura, which is severity or din, right? You know, they say a tough cookie. They never say that about a man. They'll say that about a woman. And guess what? It's not too far off the mark. Women represent severity, strength, kindness. This is what she represents in this world. Men represent, not kindness, severity, strength, din, judgment. Men represent loving kindness. As such, they are not supposed to bring din or judgment into this world. And that's why they're supposed to remove as much of their hair as possible. And that's why you see Orthodox and basically Hasidic men have as little hair as possible, those that have studied this. The beard here represents something else. We're not even going to go in there because we're not men. So I'm assuming your interest is less in that than in the sheitel, which we're finally getting to. Women, by contrast, because we represent gvura, because we represent din and judgment, we're supposed to have hair, but we're supposed to tame the forces of judgment in this world. And that is one of the reasons why we cover our hair. Because we represent strength and severity, but we cannot unleash it full force. Okay? So clearly, hair is much more than just a random outgrowth in different parts of the body. Now, another aspect of hair is, and this is not so hard to understand, that hair represents the ego. Hair on top of the head, and nothing limits a person like ego. So ergo, covering the hair means taming the ego. But finally, and this may be a little bit radical, but I don't think surprising, finally, hair is most obviously connected to the sexual dimension of one's personality. And that's not too difficult to understand either. All of us have seen beautiful women with beautiful hair, and with my apologies to Rivkie, who creates absolutely incredibly beautiful sheitels, whom I'd love if you could come to Hawaii, or I can fly out to Toronto because my sheitel could do some ministrations. Real hair is not sheitel hair. Real hair has a sexual attraction that nothing else does. Now, within the framework of Torah, sexual relations are only permitted within the framework of marriage. So therefore, when a woman gets married, all of a sudden she becomes a sexual being. Now, that's not something that she emblazons on a t-shirt on herself, but nonetheless, there is an inner intensity that comes to the fore that subconsciously is sensed. And clearly, God implanted that in our psyche, and therefore the sexual urge is something deep and a major part of our being. So unlike other religions, we are not meant to deny that urge, but we are meant to channel it and tame it in a way that, like everything else we do, uplifts and makes the world a reflection of God and holiness. When Adam and Eve, when they sinned in the Garden of Eden, before they sinned, they were not covered. Their bodies weren't covered. Their hair certainly wasn't covered because they had no sexual consciousness. They had no ego and they had no sexual consciousness. The second that they sinned, they had to cover themselves up. Here, representing the sexual dimension of our personality is something private, is something to be shared between husband and wife. It is a very powerful force. And as we can see, it can be used to elevate the marriage to the holiest levels where we're considered a partner with God in creation, or it can be abused and perverted to, as we said, the highest falls lowest. It can fall to the lowest level. As we see in our society, sexual attraction is used to sell everything from cars to tomatoes. And what cars or tomatoes have to do with sexuality is absolutely nil. But it's an abuse of that tremendous power that we have. So, therefore, we want to keep that tremendous power private, where it belongs, and keep it within the framework of our marriage, where it can blossom into something really holy. Now, all this is very abstract. And I know, like Jackie said, covering your hair is really, for those that don't do it yet, it's a great challenge. For those that do it, there's always like areas where, there's always a little bit of areas to improve. Today, we are standing in Chodesh Elul. We're standing right before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. The energy of Teshuvah in the air. That means that we have the ability to do what we cannot do all year long, which means that we can aim high and grasp for bringing a level of godliness and holiness into the world that we cannot do all year long. You know, there's a story, and I'm going to close really, really soon because I know it's getting late for you. For me, it's early afternoon, so I can go on for a long time. But I'm just going to close with a couple of stories. There's a story in the Gemara that some sages came over to Reb Yosef and said, in which mitzvah is your father most meticulous? And the word that they used was zahir. Okay, and those of you that are really familiar with Kabbalah, that clicks right away, that sounds like the word Zohar. In which mitzvah is your father meticulous? Now, you would think that that's a really funny question because his father was Rabbah, who was a great sage in and of himself. So what do you mean, which mitzvah is he meticulous in? He's meticulous in all the mitzvahs. But what they were asking, the deeper meaning of what they were asking, which mitzvah is your father zahir? In which mitzvah does your father shine? Zohar means shining. Everyone has a mitzvah, a particular mitzvah that makes their soul shine. Everybody has one mitzvah that is the gateway for their souls doing all the rest of the mitzvahs and reaching God in a unique fashion. So maybe Sheitel is your mitzvah, maybe not, I don't know. But the one that makes you shine. But it certainly has such a powerful connection to all of femininity and all Jewish females that are married, that is the mitzvah that can make all of us shine. If you don't mind, Rivkie, do I have time for one or two more stories?
Good.
Okay, I'll close with one short one and one longer one, okay? So there was, I don't know if the story is real or apocryphal, but I loved it when I read it, so I'm going to share it with you. So there was a rabbi that moved to a town in Texas, and he was new to town, and he was hired to be a rabbi of a synagogue, of a shul, and he decided to take the bus and go check out the town a little bit and see, what the place looked like. So he gets on the bus, and he gives the bus driver the bus fare, and the bus driver gives him change. And as he's sitting down, he looks into his hand, and he notices that the bus driver gave him a quarter extra, gave him more change. So he's thinking, should I give the bus driver back this quarter or not? On the one hand, it's not honest to keep more money than is coming to him. On the other hand, he feels a little silly and ridiculous. A quarter is like nothing, like it's almost embarrassing to return it. So he was going back and forth internally. And finally, it came time for him to get off the bus. He gets off the bus, he made his decision, and he gives the bus driver back the quarter. And he says, here, sir, you gave me an extra quarter. And the bus driver looks at him and he says, welcome to town, Rabbi. This must have been a really small town. He says, welcome to town, Rabbi. The bus driver tells him as follows, I gave you an extra quarter deliberately. I wanted to see what you would do with it. I've been distant from Judaism for a really long time. And just lately, I've been thinking, should I go to synagogue? Should I not? Should I go to synagogue? Should I not? And when I saw you get on the bus, I could see that you're a rabbi. So I deliberately gave you that extra quarter. and I wanted to see what you were going to do with it. So, Rabbi, I'll see you in shul on Shabbos. And the rabbi gets off the bus, and he finds the nearest electric pole, and he clutches it, and he says, Rabbeinu Shalala, master of the universe, I almost lost a Jewish soul for a quarter. So let's all think about what are the quarters in our life, the hurdles that we have to overcome, whether it's to put on a sheitel, whether it's to cover our hair when we don't normally, whether it's to be more stringent in any which way that we do cover our hair. And let's not lose that tremendous power that we have for the quarter, for the ego, for superficial reasons, for fear of what other people are going to say about us, for fear of even what our own family might react. And for every single one of us, there's always room for improvement. And do I have time for one last story, Rivkie?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to close with a personal story. And I'll try to make it as short as possible, which is not my strength, you may have noticed. So in 2002, a woman called Linda Lingle became governor of Hawaii. And I'm not even going to go to the backstory. We'll save that for another talk. But Linda Lingle became governor of Hawaii, which was a huge first. She was a woman, a Republican in an overwhelmingly Democratic state. Any Republicans' votes here actually don't even count. A woman, a Republican, a Caucasian, a white woman in a state that is over 70% Asian/Polynesian, and a Jew. So 4 firsts and 4 things going against her, and nonetheless, she won the election. Now, when she did, one of her first calls were to my husband, who had been in touch with her throughout the campaign and earlier, and she said, Rabbi, I'd like you to make Pesach Seder in the governor's mansion. Like I said, there's still a backstory to that, and we'll leave that for another time. I'd like you to make Pesach Seder in the governor's mansion. So my husband was all excited, and great, wonderful. And that's what we did for the next 8 years. However, let me tell you a little bit, you know, like Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. By the end of the 8 years, it was so unglamorous that my children were saying, Ma, we have to go to the governor's again. That was their response. Because let me tell you what this involved. This involved creating Seder for about 125, 135 people in the governor's mansion with 0 facilities. At the same time, since I haven't figured out how to be a hologram in 2 places at once, we had to, I had to figure out the logistics for doing a Seder for over 200 people in our Chabad house. We had to take all the food to and from, don't even ask how, on Yom Tov, to the governor's mansion, kosherize the kitchen there, set up a whole makeshift kitchen outdoors. And when we got this honor and privilege, we were also given a rule book this thick about what can and cannot be done in the governor's mansion. One of the things it said was no paper goods. Now, being a Chabad house and serving hundreds of people, as you can imagine, we support Dixie, the paper goods company. I think at this point they should be paying me instead of me buying their stuff. So we had to buy real dishes. And as any educated Jewish woman knows, before you use china, you have to tovel it. You have to immerse it in a mikvah. At that time, we had the world's biggest mikvah. We actually still do, but now, thankfully, we have a smaller one as well. At that time, the only mikvah in Hawaii was the Pacific Ocean. So this is what we did before Pesach, about 5 days before Pesach. I rounded up all my 7 children and some volunteers from Hebrew school. From Chabad house, excuse me, my mind's on Hebrew school. I got some volunteers from Hebrew school, loaded all the dishes and the cutlery and the brand new glasses that we bought, a set for 150, and went down to the beach. And I set up 2 stations. One station was by the side of the water, and my older children were there, and they were dipping because I could rely on them that they knew what to do with the dishes, and hopefully fewer of them would end up in the Pacific Ocean and more of them would end up in my lap. So my older dishes were dipping, my older children were dipping the dishes down by the ocean. And then myself, my second daughter, and some of the volunteers, we sat ourselves down next to the public showers on some mats, and we were rinsing the dishes. and packing them away because I'm a Jewish woman, right? I'm not going to take dirty, sandy dishes back to my Chabad house. So we were rinsing them all off in the public showers and drying them. And I do have to say, with a little bit of self-awareness, that we were a sight. We were an absolute spectacle. But you got to do what you got to do, right? Now, my daughter, Rivkie, who was sitting by my side, she was in the full throes of teenagehood. She was 15 years old at the time. And she looks at me, and I can see that she's absolutely cringing, to be honest, with good reason. And she's just like shrinking into herself. And after about like 20, 30 minutes, we were there for hours. Oh, by the way, talk about terrible timing. After we were done, that day, the Honolulu Advertiser decided to interview me about our Passover Seder. And they come to Chabad House when I'm issuing orders right, left, and center about unpacking dishes and cutlery and glasses and making sure that we have the 300 Passover Haggadahs that we need. I think that's the day they nicknamed me Hurricane Pearl. But in any case, to go back to the beach. So we're at the beach, and my daughter is cringing. And she finally turns around to me and says, like in a whisper, she goes, this is Sunday afternoon, mind you, when the beach is just like packed and swarming with people. She says, Mommy, aren't you embarrassed? And I said, I don't know where this came from, but somewhere deep inside of me, I just responded like really, really passionately to her. And I said, Rivkie, absolutely not. This is why God created the beach. And this is why Hashem created the ocean, so that we can do a mitzvah and we can serve a kosher, we can serve plates that had been totaled in the ocean. We can serve kosher food to another 130, 40 people that would not step foot in the Chabad house, but would like the honor and privilege of eating in the governor's mansion. We have nothing to be ashamed of. I said, all these people that are coming to the beach with surfboards and barely clothed, and they're here simply for physical, sensual pleasure, they could be ashamed. We have nothing to be ashamed about. Ladies, that lesson in Jewish pride, I hope it stayed with my daughter throughout her life. She's 33 years old now. I hope she remembers this, because that has stayed with me. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We only have what to be proud of. From our head, from our beautiful shekels to our toes, every limb of us is here doing God's work. So may Hashem grant that we all have a Shana Tova, a sweet, healthy, blessed new year, that we get rid of all these difficulties, that the feminine light becomes ascendant, and we can shine our light to this world in the fullest sense with the coming of Mashiach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was unbelievable. Can you hear me? There is so much I gained from this evening. I'm sure everyone feels that way as well. Thank you, Jackie, Pearl, and all the viewers for joining us. Wishing each and every one of you a Shana Tova, to be blessed with a good and sweet year. A year filled with joy, happiness, and Jewish unity, and Mashiach now. Thank you so much.
Amen. Rivkie, I'll just invite everybody to come visit us in Hawaii when travel restrictions are lifted and no quarantine. We had pre-COVID big, huge Shabbat meals every Friday night. We'd love to see you and welcome you and say aloha, or as we say here, shaloha with a shotgun.
Definitely. Thank you
Good night,
so
and
much.
everyone have a good yontif.
Good night.